Summer is tough. All those insect noises, the heat is unbearable, and the air conditioning is often broken for some reason. Thankfully, we have TFT to take our mind off those things, since lately it hasn't been doing too hot, cooling us off. Okay, sorry, that was kind of a bad one. Hey guys, and welcome back to another ProGuides Teamfight Tactics video. Today, we are going to be looking into patch 10.16, going through the interesting changes Riot made, and making some predictions on how our experts think the meta is going to shake out. Patch 10.16 is what 10.15 should have been, plus some extra deeper changes. 10.15 was close to being a good patch, but it didn't touch upon enough stuff to make it count. The meta has been growing stale, especially item-wise, with a few items like Hand of Justice being absolutely trash tier. Thankfully, 10.16 looks like a decent direction to go in, with some risks that will hopefully pay off. There's even a cool new feature coming in, showing us how your items combine by right-clicking or tapping the components. Nice, right? As usual, we will be talking about changes and balances to traits, champion changes, the new galaxy being introduced, item changes, predictions. Make sure to stay tuned all the way until the end to see what's going to be awesome in the 10.16 meta. Keep in mind that predictions made in this video are exactly that, predictions. They are subject to change, and we will definitely keep you updated in our mid-patch update. Feel free to share any comments below, giving us your feedback, especially if you have something new to add, or if you disagree with what we predicted. We will be happy to read them. If anything is pulled from the original PvE changes or added in, you can find the info in the comments as well about what ended up not making it to the live servers. Before we dive in, I just want to let you guys know that we have a Discord community and a new subreddit that is growing really fast. We have you to thank for that, and we want to continue building our community and helping you be a part of it, so make sure you check out the link in the description below. Trait changes. A few of the chase traits, ones obtainable via spatula items, have been buffed to make them something that really gets you top 2. 8 Battlecast is getting a really big buff of 120 damage / healing per application, making it a veritable nuke every time it procs. Can't wait to see where that takes reroll Battlecast. 8 Darkstar, which often could lose to 6 Darkstar, is getting a well-deserved buff, making each unit dying an extra item on your units essentially. 6 Infiltrators didn't really need a buff since it's pretty bad anyway, outside of fringe mech comps, but it got a buff anyway. 9 Rebels finally got a buff, as the trait was pretty much a useless chase, giving you very little returns for all the resources it needs. 9 Star Guardians was a bit better than 9 Rebels, but still insufficient for all the resource investment. It feels a bit more worth it now, so Star Guardian Urgot can still live on in our hearts. Now let's talk about the normal trait changes, which will impact our games much more. Chrono is getting a small buff, making 6 Chrono even more alluring, and 4 Chrono should be something you definitely try out now. Even 8 Chrono gets a buff, making it a bit ridiculous, but still very fringe. Rebel is getting a small buff, helping poor Jinx and Aurelion out a bit, at least when you assemble 6 of them. Infiltrators get a small quality of life change, making placement much easier. It doesn't matter where you place your infiltrators now, they will reach the back line in a fixed time frame. Space Pirates gets a big buff to their chance of getting an item, with 1 in 3 champions killed netting you one. 6 Vanguard got a well-deserved nerf, making them still unfun to play against, but not unfair. That's it for the trait changes. Making chase traits worth it was one of the main goals this patch, with these changes seemingly making it happen. As for normal traits, Riot mentioned this is the last time Chrono gets a buff, but the other changes should not impact our gameplay too much. Champion buffs and nerfs. Moving on to champion changes, the second developer goal this patch was to make 3-star units worth it. Many underwhelming 3-stars have been buffed, so let's take a look at those first. Note that not many carries have been buffed in the effort to avoid a hyper roll meta. 1 costs. Illaoi got a big buff to both her defense stealing and spell damage. Malphite got an even bigger shield, essentially giving him close to double HP. Leona got a huge buff in her damage reduction, making her immune to damage from most units that aren't a carry. Poppy got a small buff to both her damage and shield, probably to avoid Candyland shenanigans happening again. Ziggs got a small buff, maybe the only carry to get a buff. 2 costs. Ahri gets a small damage buff for those Star Guardian lovers out there. Annie is actually getting one of the more impactful buffs, making her an even stronger tank for sorcerer comps and a bit better in the mech, likely surviving the mech's death. Blitzcrank will do elite damage when pulling things in, even one-shot some units. Darius will at least do some more damage when 3-starred, but he will still get CC'd or die, so that's actually of little impact. Shen is finally worth 3-starring. I have 3-starred him just looking for Xayahs and Master Yi's so many times, but it doesn't feel worth it. Well, now it certainly is, and it pushes him forward as a unit worth itemizing as well. However, be aware that this change has been deemed a bit too risky and might not ship to live. As always, look to the comment section to find out if it didn't. Mordekaiser gets a decent buff to his spell shield, not really too much help, but every little thing helps. Nautilus is a unit no one ever said, let's 3-star him about. However, he now is a downright terror, stunning people for a whopping 6 seconds. Finally, Lucian gets a bit more spell damage, but with Vayne and Aurelia in the picture, we don't really see him take off as an option. 3 costs. 3 costs are the premier 3-star target, as they usually give you the most bang for your buck. Speaking of, Vayne, perhaps the most useless 3-star in the game, is now worth it. The jump in AD now justifies the 18 gold you have to invest into her. Ezreal is also getting a buff, making him at least do some damage when ulting, though 3-starring him is not a great idea. Rumble is even more of a menace now, and if he gets to ult post-mech death, he will destroy people. Vi is actually another one of the underwhelming 3-star 3 costs, and she gets a damage buff in both damage instances of her ultimate, upping her damage quite a bit. With Ionic Spark, she might one-shot units now if you 3-star. 4 costs and 5 costs. Gnar is getting even bigger when in his ult form, gaining a monstrous amount of HP. Riven gets buffed across the board, making 3-star Riven a terror that does not get one-shot as easily and does a significantly higher amount of damage. Janna gets even more power into her 3-star form, which is kind of irrelevant since you will rarely 3-star any 5 cost, especially a contested one like her. Remember, all of those are only 3-star changes. As for actual champion changes, there were very few of them. The main target were 4 costs, adjusting their power a bit. Let's go over them one by one. 1, 2, and 3 costs. Fiora gets a small HP buff, should be helpful in the early game when poor Cybers has actually been suffering a bit since red buff's nerfs. Zed gets to steal a bit more AD since he is so squishy he might as well ramp up a bit faster. Finally, Bard gets a nerf in his 1-star form, needing at least 2-star to be really strong. This really impacts the meta, making those Bard starts way less oppressive. 4 and 5 costs. Fizz gets a bit of a nerf in his 1-star form since his CC and AoE damage is enough impact, no need to do so much damage as well. Jhin goes back to his initial attack speed before all the buffs, he actually went full circle. Teemo gets a bit of attack speed, making blue buff even better on him since he will stack full mana even faster. Jinx gets a small 5 AD buff, which will help her get resets easier, but not changing her survivability and explosiveness thankfully. As for 5 costs, it's only Gangplank who gets a bit of a buff, in line with the Space Pirate buff. He now deals a lot more damage in his 1 and 2-star forms, perhaps making him an option for Rebels again and buffing mech comps that use him as a demolitionist. That's it with the champion changes. There weren't many, but those few changes should help nudge the meta in the right direction, especially the Jhin nerf. New Galaxy. The new galaxy is Salvage World. I got some boomer Treasure Planet flashbacks at the name. We are saying goodbye to Star Cluster, which is neither hot or cold, the galaxy being a relative non-issue outside of big high rolls such as getting the 2-star unit of your choice with an item you needed on it. Salvage World is probably the most insane galaxy they've released yet, and here's why. Selling a champion will break down items they own into their components. Slamming items on champions you won't probably use early will definitely be the premier play. Troll item carousels where you got a sword breaker are not an issue anymore since you can just equip it on a champion and break it down to useful components. Same goes for Kayn items you might not like. Items that are good early like Static Shiv and Ludens can be used until 3-5 or so, then sold to be made into blue buffs and last whispers, etc. Switching around items and trying them out throughout the early and mid game where your comp is more fluid will be the true skill testing challenge to this galaxy. Expect it to be a very interesting galaxy to play with a focus on unit strength, especially good item carriers that can be sold in favor of a complete comp later in the game. Item changes. One of the main goals for Riot in this patch is to make underwhelming items more interesting. Let's see how they did. Hand of Justice's healing roll is amazingly better now. You heal for 50% of any damage you deal, which is really strong. Locket gets a decent buff, which will not impact things too much, though more than 1 Lockets will be better. Hextech Gunblade gets BT's effect from League, which is great, especially for champions like Aurelion Sol, but not necessarily an oppressive change. Runaan's Hurricane gets a really small buff, with its bolt doing a bit more damage. Static Shiv gets a bit more late game insurance, lessening its damage, and getting the Torment the Weak talent from WoW, doing more damage to shields and CC'd targets. Finally, Swordbreaker disarms 1 and 3 instead of 1 and 4, which still makes it fairly bad, but at least you won't feel too bad about getting it randomly. That's it for items. Hopefully they won't feel too bad in making them, especially Hand of Justice and Hextech Gunblade. Now, finally, let's move into predictions. Predictions! Champion predictions. Among all the Battlecast champions that are part of the reroll comp, Illaoi and Kog'Maw really stand out right now after all these buffs. Illaoi got a strong buff, so itemizing her with a Shroud and Ionic will be amazing. Kog'Maw did not get any buffs, but the new Static Shiv will be quite good on him now, helping his early and still not being bad late since the extra mana alone makes him start out with an ult. Jhin will not be as contested thankfully, and Jinx will be more contested as a result of her small buff. Outside of whole comps, no other champion should see an exorbitant change in their pick or success rate, except perhaps Vayne being more worthy of a 3-star chase. Comp predictions. We'll go over some comps that will somehow be affected, so let's start with Hyperroll Battlecast. They received some direct and indirect buffs this patch to a comp that is really decent, especially if they hit their Urgot. The 2 spatula items stretch win condition is really amazing for the end game of the comp. With all the buffs to 3 stars, a bit of a hyper-roll meta might emerge, using some of the improved 3-star units, but since none of them are carries, there will most likely not be too much of an impact. If something crazy happens, Riot has said they will be swift in coming in and correcting any big and unpleasant meta changes. Jinx comps should see a resurgence, but not too much change in their regard. Aurelion Sol is still the true win condition, otherwise the comp falls off like a stone off a cliff. Be careful when playing it. Astro Snipers are definitely nerfed as well as Dark Stars since both comps were quite dependent on Jhin for a large amount of the game. However, Astro Snipers have Teemo and Dark Stars have Xerath, so no big changes should happen outside of people contesting them less. Last but not least, the mech should remain at a similar power level. Hand of Justice mech might actually be a thing now with the new items. Overall, not much changes with this patch. Things just equalize a bit more, and underwhelming champions or comps feel a bit better to play. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Let us know which comp you think will dominate in 10.16. If you want to get better at TFT, visit ProGuides.com, where you can find challenger coaches who will help you reach your dream rank, and I will see all of you in the next video.